This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Patt and Stephen Chung.
Good morning, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great, Stephen. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. And now with school ending, my kids are now off. Actually, I wanted to talk about architecture school.
That's a great topic. We both have gone to architecture school.
We have. So now I do get lots of questions about architecture school, what kind of school. There's also lots of different kinds of programs and all of that. But let's back up. I think you had once mentioned that when you were a kid, you were always designing your dream home.
Yes.
Talk about that.
I was. Well, it's interesting. My dad is a realtor. And way back then, decades ago, he would come home with what were called listing sheets on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And they had photographs of homes and then all the home data. And he always said, Dougie, don't share these with anybody. They're very private. But anyway, you could flip them over and you could draw on them. And I would draw houses constantly. Constantly just thinking about what would my dream house look like. And it was ironic and cool because there were pictures of homes and then I would always think about what that house looked like and then I'd draw something like it. And I was doing it all the time. So always interested in drawing houses. And in fact, you and I are interested in designing your dream home and helping other people do the same. So,
it's funny, by the way, you and I like to say house. Because somehow house is more impersonal, isn't it? Whereas home, suddenly I feel like someone lives there.
Yeah.
And as architects, we're very, we're more impersonal, I guess. We tend to use the word house.
Yeah.
And we kept to always remind ourselves, this is a home. It's for somebody, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. All right,
so when I was growing up, kind of like you, I grew up in a neighborhood where there were a lot of suburban ranchy type houses, not very interesting, very repetitive. And I used to look at the Sunday Times magazine. In the back, there were all these real estate sections and all these really cool beach houses like on Long Island. And they were really modern, very, very, flat roof, a lot of glass and beautiful sites. And I used to think, God, I want to do that. That's my dream home. I want to design one of those. And so in school, when kids would draw little houses, they would always have, pitched roofs with chimneys and that sort of thing. And I would draw these boxes with all the big windows. And the teachers would say, that's not a house. I said, it's not. I said, it's not a house. That's not what a house looks like. And so I was already kind of a troublemaker at a young age. So.
Oh, I love it, man. That's great.
So that's why I guess we both got into architecture. We really did enjoy designing our dream home, or like to sort of fantasize about that.
Yeah.
And I know you especially with your YouTube channel do get a lot of inquiries from young people that it's the same. They sort of love the idea of designing their dream home and wonder about architecture school. So we've got some tips, Doug, about architecture school. Why don't you go first? What's your first tip?
Yeah, so, in thinking about what kids have to consider if they're going to go to architecture school, my tips relate to that. So I would say my first tip is kind of a big deal, and people shy away from this, but I would say meet an architect if you can and spend some time with them. I know it's challenging. It's tough to get on the phone and call people and, work your way into an office or meet somebody. But, you start with mom and dad. They can work with friends and family, and they can help you to find an architect that maybe you go visit and you sit down and you talk to. But more than that, you're now in that environment. You're in the office. Yep. Maybe even get to shadow them for a day, which would be wonderful. And, we love that. We love when people are with us and we get to talk about what we're doing. So you shadow them for a day. You take a look at the paperwork that they're reviewing. What are they reading? What are they signing? Listen to them on the phone. Architects are on the phone all day long with contractors and owners. So that's a great way to learn what they're doing. Look at the computer software that the office is using. What are they using? Can I learn the same thing? Is it the same thing as SketchUp? Is it AutoCAD? Is it ArchiCAD? Is it MicroStation? And then lastly, talk to the people that are there. I mean, what a wonderful way to get a completely honest opinion about what's it like to be an architect and work in a firm. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing. And I will tell you that when I worked in an office with 12 or 15 or 20 people, they tell you the truth. They're bored or they're exhausted, they're worn out, they're sick of sitting where they're sitting, and they will sit and they will tell you what they like and what their gripes are about the office. So you're going to get I think, a really complete picture very quickly from an architecture office if you you figure out a way to get in there for a day or two and do some learning. And the reason I'm saying that is when I went to architecture school, maybe it cost $50,000-$60,000 to go to school for 4 or 5 years. Today costs $250,000 to do the same thing. So you're dropping a lot more money than I did. And yeah, things have changed, economies of scale, but you're going to end up with a lot more student debt than I did. And as we know, student debt's becoming a real challenge for people. So meet an architect. Tip number 1, meet an architect if you can and go to visit their office.
No, excellent point. And I would say that probably high school, even freshman, sophomore, one of those summers or winter vacations, if you don't know an architect, maybe mom and dad know somebody in town, or you can ask around. There's probably always 1 or 2 architects in town. And like you, I found, because I did the same when I was a kid growing up. He was actually my friend, someone I knew. I didn't like him so much, but his dad was an architect, and I would go to his house and I want to spend time with his dad because ask him questions and go to his library and look at things. And I was so fascinated by all his desk and his all the tools, all the things he had, the models around his desk, and ask him all these questions. And of course, the dad loved it because it was like, oh, someone's interested in what I do. Like none of his sons were interested, so he would. I was like became the next son, right? And I would just. And he said, hey, you want to volunteer in my office and. Basically do deliveries, make blueprints at the time, and I can maybe put trees and models, but just kind of play architect, and as you say, really just more like through osmosis, be in that environment and sit at the lunch table and just listen to architects talk, and I love that. So I think that's a great point. I really like that suggestion.
Thanks, man. What's your tip?
My first tip has to do with, it's kind of like what you're talking about, but let's say you've done that. Let's say you shadowed and you're really into this. And as you say, it's a big expense. I think one of the next steps is doing one of these summer programs in architecture. Now, my dad put me in one there was a high school program at the Exeter Academy. It's a private school, but in the summertime, you can take like a course or courses. And I took an architecture course, the idea being that he knew that it would be hard and it was summertime and I wasn't going to play sports or whatever. And he thought I would really dislike it. But of course that backfired because he really didn't want me to be an architect. He wanted me to be a doctor or something else. But anyway, but I found that really a really great kind of compressed, a little bit of everything kind of architecture experience. It's sort of like what you'd encounter as a freshman, done in 6 weeks. And so it's a little bit of drawing, a little bit of site visits, a little bit of office visits, architect office visits, obviously some sightseeing, and one design project, something very simple, maybe a little pavilion, and then working with a critic, getting history lessons in the morning, doing some drawing, and then in the afternoon doing some designing. I really found that, well, actually I loved it. So, again, backfired. My dad's backfired. But I think for anyone, it's a great way to kind of take the next step without going all the way in and saying, you know what, I'll spend, whatever, maybe $1,000 or whatever. I don't know what it costs now, but spend 4 weeks, let's say, go to a local college that often offer these kind of courseworks, do the 6 week or 4 week program. And you really have a good sense of it, whether you really want this, because you really have to really want it. So I would highly suggest looking at the local colleges, see what the offerings are. And, in the case for me, there was a local high school that had that opportunity. So I found that to be a great next step.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Had I done that, I would have never been an architect.
Alrighty.
Just kidding.
Tip number 2 for you.
All right, number 2, if you want to go to architecture school, understand that many of your fellow students, including you, may not become an architect. So I probably told this story before, but orientation, Penn State, rooms full, about 150 people. Larry Wolf, who was he had to have been in his late 60s, early 70s at the time, architect in Pittsburgh for many, many years, great guy. I studied with him at Penn State later. So he's sitting there and he says, look, you may find this surprising. You got all the parents there too. You may find this surprising, but many of you are not going to graduate in the architecture program. There's the gigantic gasp, like, are you kidding me? How could that happen? And what are we doing here? And are we in the wrong place? But in fact, we graduated from far less than half of those people. So he said, at least or there may be at least half of you that are gone. The second thing, many of you are going to finish architecture school, but you're going to end up going and doing something else. And again, everybody was like stunned. But the reality is that's very true. Now, that is not to say you can get an architecture degree and become a graphic designer immediately. You just can't do that, right? When you get out of school, people are looking for a degree. They want to know you learned something. But it is to say that you can study architecture, work your way through an office or two, and then eventually go and do something else with that degree. And what I would end with is Larry Wolf said, look, if we're successful, we're going to do one thing for you guys that's super important. We're going to teach you how to become problem solvers. And in teaching you that skill, we're going to make the world available to you, because what you do in the real world, CEOs of corporations do this every day. Important people in important jobs do this every day. They problem solve. And that's what we're going to teach you how to do here in school. And that was, in fact, the case. So let's say we had 150, 160 people. Maybe we had 60 or 70 that graduated. And many of those people aren't doing architecture. They're doing something else. And in fact, that's what I do. I do architecture, but I do lots of other things. So be aware that architecture school may be a stepping stone for you. It may be something that you begin with and then you move on. I like to tell students, you can't, if you get an architecture degree, you're kind of starting at the top. You can just about do anything after that, but you can't get a graphic design degree and become an architect. That's not the way it works. But you can work backwards. That's not to say you're going to be a graphic designer when you're an architect, but what I'm saying is you learn so much about so many things in architecture school that the education is extraordinary and it's valuable. And I highly recommend it to people, especially those who are older and maybe can financially do it. And even if they're not going to become architects, it's an enriching experience. But be aware, it's a challenge, and you may not become an architect.
I think that's a good point. I'm going to move my third tip to number 2 because it sort of has something to do with what you're talking about. And I think that it's true that it is an all-consuming kind of experience, especially as a freshman. It is an endurance test. A lot of it is it's ridiculous. I mean, the amount of work that's asked of you, the number of models or drawings that they want, the number of different schemes or options that they want, it's actually not doable, and yet they request it anyway. I think there's a weeding out process. I think that there's a crash course in developing skills. Like, it takes a long time to learn how to make a nice model, and it's not that it's so intellectually challenging. It just takes a long time. It's very repetitive, and you're cutting the same piece of wood over and over again to make trees or whatever it is.
Brutal.
It's an endurance test. I think that there is a lot about it that it feels kind of like a, I don't know, it's a hazing thing, but it's sort of you have to pay your dues kind of thing, that everyone's gone through that and you're going to go through it too. And your first year is going to be kind of torture, which is why, you hear things like architorture and things like this. And, this is where I learned about no-dos and caffeine pills and to try to stay awake. And it became a source of pride to say that I was up for 74 hours and he was up for 69 hours. And we would fall asleep in strange positions in strange places just because you'd just be like, and just crash, somewhere, anywhere, right? And it became a strange point of pride. And you have to really kind of like that. It's a bit it's a bit kind masochistic. I think that there is some of that. I think the teachers have that kind of, it's the opposite, right? It's sadistic, right? I think they enjoy the bleary-eyed. I mean, it's not healthy. You don't eat well. You can't really exercise or do other things because you don't have the energy. I mean, it really is incredibly difficult, and it feels like you're kind of pledging a fraternity for the entire year. It's just a kind of endurance test. And when you even the weekends. So when I rest, it's like during winter vacation or something, right? I mean, it's not healthy, but somehow you like it, or I liked it. And I think you have to kind of like that. Like, are you that type? Because if you're more sensible and you think this is ridiculous, I'm not doing this, then you're not going to kind of make it, because it's the ones that really kind of keep banging their heads and have developed, hey, you wanted 2 options, here's 6. Like, wow, you really did cycle through all the things the teacher has asked you to cycle through, and you've done it. That's impressive, and you're sort of moving ahead. And the guy that says, hey, 1 is good enough, it's not gonna, that attitude is not kind of fly. So
well, unless he wants to be a developer. I'm just kidding. I just offended like 100,000 people. I'm just kidding.
But yeah, so I think that there is a bit about that, and when people talk about it, it sounds like they were exaggerating. We're really not. It really is a pretty miserable kind of existence. At the same time, you have this incredible bond with your classmates because you feel different than the rest of the schools. Like you know, they look at us like, wow, you guys are crazy. You know, you're up all night. We're carrying around bricks and big things of cardboard, and just we're always walking. Everyone knows who we are. They kind of know who we are. You feel
lights are always on.
Lights are always on. So that's my second tip. Well, actually, what was the tip? Oh, you have to like pain.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I think you've got to have the attitude of a fighter, and many times that's part of you. I mean, that can be learned too, but somehow, you are all really ready to fight and win, and things are going to be really tough, and things are going to stink, and you're going to be sad a lot, and you're going to be tired, but you're going to fight through it. So I think that's part of it.
Actually, just on that note, because we do is when we design projects, we present in public forums. Every presentation is public. It's in front of the class. It's in front of critics. So when you don't do well, everyone knows about it, and you get pummeled.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking.
Being a fighter, you have to be resilient. You have to.
Good word.
You can take it, you digest it, because no one, I promise you, says this is fantastic. And next, there's always something not right. It's not working. It's not as good as it can be, and you are going to get criticized. And I've had many classmates that have cried, and probably just fall apart because they're exhausted and they're crying, and it's painful to watch. But you better have a good sense of humor about it and just sort of understand that this is all part of the process. So
that should be a show, actually, not just crying in school, but when we've seen people in the field melt down. That would be an awesome. I've got a few great stories to tell.
Do that. All righty, Doug. What is your third tip on the subject of architecture school?
Okay, so third tip, once you're in school, realize that you're likely not getting a real world education. Now, I know that sounds insane, and I say that a little tongue in cheek. There are definitely colleges out there that are giving real world educations, but my experience and my experience teaching, the little teaching that I've done, my experience going through school and then talking to students that I work with is that most universities are still really focused on design. I mean, if you recall, Stephen, when you're in school, this whole studio process, studio is a course, typically happens at the end of the day. It might be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, might be Tuesday, Thursday. It's for a few hours. It's many times every day of the week or 4 days of the week. It's for a number of hours, and then you're in the studio after that for lots and lots of hours. So studio is really the design portion of an architect's education, and that's where you're learning how to take ideas and themes and turn them into real buildings. And interestingly, that is very little of what architects do in the real world. Now, we do that, but it's not most of what we do. So I made a quick list here. We do a lot of paperwork, right? A lot of CYA. We know what that means. A lot of staffing stuff. If we've got employees, we do a lot of listening. So employees come and talk to us, or the people that we're working with on our team are talking to us about matters that have to do with our business. We deal with contracts. We deal with meetings. I do meeting minutes for every one of the meetings we do. I look at requisitions, right? So when the contractor is billing, I've got to take a look at every one of his requisitions, make sure everything is in order. I do lots of phone calls. I do tons of coordinating, probably not as much as I should be doing, but you've got to, as an architect, you got to make sure everybody's on the same page. You're typically working with lots of different consultants, so you got to make sure everybody's working on the same thing. We work on red lines. So when we mark up our drawings or somebody marks them up for us, we're making lots of changes. Then, of course, we do shop drawing reviews. We do tons of emails. We do some design. But at the end of the day, it's really all problem solving. So what I'm getting at here is, you go to school, and I, unlike Stephen, I kind of fell in love with school, so much so. I mean, I know Stephen enjoyed school, but I really fell in love with it. I wanted to stay in school, and I wanted to get a PhD, and I didn't ever want to go out and work at all. I mean, once I realized what architects were doing, because I did a couple summers where I worked for architects, I was bored out of my skull. I was thinking, this is crazy. I'm making paperclip airplane wings that I'm strapping on my electric eraser. I mean, there were times that I just didn't know what to do because the guy that had hired me didn't have work for me to do, or the work was so boring. And looking through schedules and working on stair details and window details and schedules. And anyway, it can be so tedious and so monotonous in the beginning, and all the drafting, and especially you're in a small office, you're not learning a ton because you're not talking to. There's nobody to really talk to except for your boss, and he comes in and makes some demands and then he leaves. So anyway, it's challenging out there in the real world, and school isn't like the real world in many ways. And so I'd say, look, when you go to school, be ready for it. It's going to be really tough. And then when you get out, there's a whole new set of challenges. It's kind of a different paradigm. So I know I'm being hard on the educational process, and I don't mean to be. All I'm saying is my experience and the experience of people I know is that school really is pretty different from work. So what's your experience on that?
Well, one thing about that. Yeah, before my third tip is one, just to finish what you're add on to what you're talking about, is that the biggest difference is that there's no client in school.
Yeah.
Like when we design something, we do it by ourselves, for ourselves, and we get used to that. We sort of like that, right? And then as soon as you graduate and you're out in the real world and you say, here, I want to do this. The client says, that's not really what I want. I want this. And you say, I kind of want to do this. I'm not compromising. I'm kind of an artist. And then you don't have a job. So it's a bit startling, and very few people are able to do what they want as a designer. And you have to be very fortunate. It's very rare that you can just sort of do whatever you want. It's just not like that. And I kind of wish there was a little bit more of that in school. Just to, again, simulate game time conditions, just make it, have some resistance, have an irrational person you're working with that changes their mind constantly, whatever it is, but just has a different vision. This is not your house. I'm going to live in this house. I paid you to design a house for me, not you. And so actually you're like, yeah, that's true. So that's something that there's a whole new skill set that needs to be developed when you start to learn that. So that's my sort of end of your tip to
Great.
Okay, so my tip, this is a little tedious, but I just want to, the basic point is you have to go beyond the guidance counselor. Because when I went to my guidance counselor in high school and was asking about architecture schools, I mean, the person basically knew that there was such a thing as architecture school, but really had no idea beyond that and was no help at all. And, these days where there's so much more information out there, you can sort of get a better sense of it. But I would say that it's really important to distinguish what kind of architecture school do you want to go to, because there are many different kinds. And I would just say, for example, there is a 4-year program. There are two kinds of 4-year programs, or there's a 5-year program. The 5-year program is a professional degree program. It means that when you finish 5 years and then you do some internship years, you can become a licensed architect. The other two 4-year programs, when you finish the 4 years, you have to go on to get a master's degree in order to get that professional degree. So you have to know that with the 4-year program, you're going to have to do a master's degree program. With the 5-year, longer, but you can then become an architect. And now with the two 4-year programs, it's even more complicated because you've got something called a 4-year Bachelor of Arts in Architecture or a 4-year Bachelor in Science in Architecture. The Bachelor of Science is a little more intensive. You're learning more structures. You're getting a little closer to what a Bachelor of Architecture does, but you're not quite there yet. Whereas the Bachelor of Arts, you do some studio, you do some history, you do a little bit of that technical stuff, but it's a little bit more of a liberal arts kind of education. If you go to an Ivy League like Columbia or a school like that, you are going to get a pretty good liberal arts base with a concentration of architecture. That's a 4-year Bachelor of Arts. Now, with a master's degree, the master's degree programs look at you and say, okay, you've done 4 years of a little bit of architecture, but you're going to have to be here for 3-4 years to get your degree. Whereas if you've got that Bachelor of Science, they kind of know that you have a bit more experience than the Bachelor of Arts guy. So you can come maybe for 2 years and get your master's. So I think it's really important to figure out which direction you want to go. And schools are all different, depending. You might like, Columbia, but Columbia doesn't have a 5-year program. So you might have to then look at, I think Penn State's a 5-year program. I'm not sure.
I think that's a 5-year program. Yeah.
And so if you say, I want the 5 years, now you're limited to this many schools. If you I like the more liberal arts oriented, you got this many schools. If you want the Bachelor of Science, you've got this many schools. They're all so different. So you really have to kind of look and figure out what you want. You have to look at these different schools with three different divisions, I guess, and really figure out what you want. So it's not just I want to go to architecture school. You have to figure out which kind of architecture school I want to go to. Sorry,
Yeah.
very tedious, but it's a big decision.
No, I think that's really helpful, and I would add stylistically, these schools are all very different too, or in
Very
terms of whether or not they're theory based or they're kind of a real world based education. I've been to different schools like that. So you sit down in a review, and kids are designing like real brick buildings, and you go
Right.
to another school, you sit down, and there's nothing real about what they're drawing. I mean, it could be made real, but it doesn't look anything like a building, right? They're more about ideas. So lots of different kinds of schools in that respect as well.
Okay, so Doug, that was our that was education or architecture schools, and as always, we do have a question here that we've singled out that I thought was interesting. And you ready for this question? Question of the week.
All right, give it to me, man.
How much can I expect to make or earn, I guess, upon graduating from school?
Oh,
I know that the, hey, let me finish the question here. I know that the salary during internship years is not very high, but after I get my license, doesn't it increase significantly? I worry about paying off my student loans. Well, so that's a good question. What do you think, Doug?
wow. Okay, so I don't have any employees, and I consult for Joe Moore Architects up in Greenwich. I am not involved in hiring for the most part. So I'm not very good on the salary thing. What I will say is that my salary didn't change at all when I got a license. Nobody cared. I mean, it was like I walked in one day and I said, "Hey, I got my license," and everybody's like, "Hey, who cares?" So I don't even look. I'm an old man at this point, so I may not have the kind of experience to answer a question like that. But I would say, getting a license really matters a lot for you. Long term, if you want to work on your own or you want to consult and you need a license in a state to sign drawings. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to say, I'm an architect, because legally you can't say I'm an architect if you're doing architectural work in this country, in any state, in all 50 states, unless you have a license. So you get your license. There are a couple reasons to get your license, but it most likely will not affect your salary unless your boss has said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a raise when you get your license." So what's your experience?
I would say that I don't know where this person is or emailing from, but in my region, which is the Northeast, the sort of Massachusetts area, I bet someone with a 5-year program just graduating, not a lot of experience, is probably going to make 40 in that range.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Something like that, which is not a lot given how expensive it is. But I think the way most offices look at someone like that's coming out with a 5 years of school is really, they're not that helpful right now. They're not that useful, and we're going to have to teach you a lot. So that's kind of how we look at that. I mean, I used to think as a young person I can do everything, but actually you realize you really can't do that much at all and contribute in an office in any meaningful way without being there for a little bit. And typically what happens is incrementally you go up a little bit. And let's say you're super diligent and you're able to do your internship years in a very good way where you have all the experiences you need so that you can go on to take your exam in 3-4 years, let's say 3 years. So you go incrementally, and maybe when you get licensed, maybe you'll go up a little bit again, bump a little again. But it's not like you're there, boom. Nah, not even a chance. I think more likely or a better scenario would be to get that license, then go try to work in another place and come in as a qualified architect, and probably you can go up quite a bit higher.
Very good point.
It's never what is portrayed on television. You're never going to be super wealthy. I guess you have a chance if you either climb a corporate ladder or you own your own firm. But if you're going to just be kind of a staff guy, it just doesn't really ever go that high. And that's sort of the reality of our profession. People think that we do really well, but I think it sort of goes up slowly. And either you got to go do your own thing, or you work for the big corporate office, you really climb the ladder there, you become a rainmaker, you bring in a lot of jobs. But what typically happens if you be a little expensive and you're a little older, there's a guy right here, you can go away and we'll bring this next guy up and he can replace you. So I think that's what I've seen and that's what I've experienced. If you're not a rainmaker or super talented in one area that the firm doesn't have, you can be replaced.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that was not the question. Sorry.
I think that's right on the money. Yep.
All right, Doug.
This has been Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.